Hello and welcome to Class 13, the practice test walkthrough. As before, the test is open note, but not open internet. And that is because I'm encouraging you to take notes, and I don't want you to use ChatGPT. So there's a lockdown browser that prevents the use of ChatGPT. It also will prevent you from accessing other online notes, so you'll have to have written notes. Um, S- Um, so this test actually has 12 questions, but three of them are worth collectively 10 points because they're essentially three parts for question 8, and the system doesn't let you have things doesn't let you divide a question into parts. And as before, the questions move sequentially through the material that we've been dealing with this unit. So the first three questions are about argument evaluation in general, which is the material that was discussed in Class 8. So the first question that comes up here is, which of the following are true of deductive arguments as they are defined in this course? So item 1, the arguments in empirical science, that is science that studies the world that we can see and touch and hear around us, are good examples of deduction. Well, let's remember what we learned in Class 8. We can just zoom over to the PowerPoint. This is slide 2020, where we define deduction and induction. Deduction, an argument is deductive if it aims at validity and inductive if it aims at strength. And our example of the deductive sciences were pure mathematics. And the inductive sciences are empirical science, science about the world around us. So as you can see, that the first one is not true. That's actually something that's true of inductive science. So we can go back to the test and skip that one. An argument is deductive if it proves the conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt. Again, we already can see from that slide that it's not true. Beyond a reasonable doubt is a standard of proof for strong arguments. Valid is an even higher standard of proof. But here, an argument is deductive if it aims at validity. We just saw that. A successful deductive argument must be strong, but it doesn't need to be valid. Well, that can't be right. Deductive arguments are possible in domains with rigidly restricted definitions like mathematics or logical games and puzzles. And we already saw that mathematics was an example of deductive reasoning. But if we go back earlier in that PowerPoint slide, or that PowerPoint presentation, we can see here, when is validity possible? Validity is only possible in very narrow situations, and part of that is areas with rigid definitions that avoid the messiness of the world around us and ascend into the world of logic and pure mathematics. So this one is also correct. We leave the other ones blank. Which of the following is the best definition of a standard of proof? The obligation of one side to prove their case. Ooh, that's tempting, but that's actually the burden of proof. A fallacy committed when the speaker tries to distract the audience with irrelevant evidence. No, that's it's not a fallacy. So actually we can rule out this one and this one. It is the amount of evidence that a party needs, the party with the burden of proof must produce. And again, you can find that in the PowerPoint presentation for Class 8. It's just right here. Okay. For the following passages, rewrite the argument in standard form, state whether it is deductive or inductive, and if it's deductive, evaluate it as valid or sound, and if it's inductive, say whether it is strong or weak. So let's just do our standard thing. It's important when answering these questions to do all three parts, and it's helpful to number them the way that they're numbered in the question prompt. So we put this in standard form. We need to identify the conclusion. We've got an indicator word there and there. There's a therefore, there's a because. The conclusion is that Taylor Swift is taller than Kristen Bell. It'll be down here. Oops. C. Just use a space. And then the other two statements are premises. We do not include the indicator words when writing things in standard form. So this is BP1. Nicki Minaj is taller than Kristen Bell. And Taylor Swift is taller than Nicki Minaj. B2. So you might think this is inductive since it's about physical people in the physical world, but it's really just about the property of being taller than. If one person is taller than another person, who in turn is taller than a third person, then the first person is taller than the third person. This is actually a mathematical property, right? So we're going to say that it is deductive and valid. So we're going to say it's deductive because the premises make the conclusion certain if they were true. And it's valid. Actually, it's let's do it like this. It's valid because the premises make the conclusion certain if they were true, and it's deductive because it's aiming at validity, and in fact, succeeding at validity. Valid, I-T-Y. All right. So those are three questions about, from class 8, they're sort of about evaluating things in general. So the questions here are going to be about valid, strong, cogent, sound, those terms, deductive and inductive, also related to that, and then standards of proof and burden of proof. The next three questions are from the argument by analogy class, class 9. So which of the following is the best definition for an argument by analogy? It's an inductive argument with a quantified categorical statement in the conclusion and statements about particular cases in the premises. Now, remember when we were talking about quantified categorical statements, those were generalizations and instantiation syllogism. An inductive argument that starts from the premise that things are similar in some ways and infers the conclusion that they are similar in other ways. That is the correct answer. Keep reading. It's important to check to be sure. A statement that two things are similar in some ways. This is just an analogy. It's not necessarily an argument by analogy. An inductive argument that claims a proposition is true because it's been asserted by a position and a person to know. That's an argument from authority. That's not right. All right. Identify the passage below. That's the instructions are garbled. The passage below is identify whether the passage below is an argument by analogy or an analogy that's being used in some other way, such as to illustrate. If the passage is an argument by analogy, write it in standard form. As soon as I saw all these formulas and stuff, I knew I'd like symbolic logic. It's like math, which I love. Okay, there are no indicator terms here. However, you can see that the person is clearly drawing a conclusion. They know something about math and they're inferring something about logic. So we go like this. Argument by analogy and P1 logic is like math in that they both involve symbols. Actually, the similarity is deeper than that. P2, the speaker likes math. The speaker will like logic. Capitalization, put in some colons, and we're done. Okay, so for this next one, we need to do the full shebang on analyzing arguments by analogy. So we identify the parts, then we write it in standard form, then we evaluate it. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is from another critical thinking textbook. Like the former president Ronald Reagan, President George Bush is a staunch conservative, has strong conservative Christian values, and adheres dogmatically to certain conservative principles. President Reagan followed his fierce fidelity to principles and values, found that his fierce fidelity led him to a foreign policy disaster, the Iran-Contra debacle, and President Bush will have the same problem. So this is an argument by analogy. The reference analog, we can abbreviate that RA, is Reagan. Target analog is Bush. The known similarity is that they are staunch conservative Christians. And the inferred similarity is they will get involved in a foreign policy debacle. So this is part one. Once we know those parts, we can just put them together to create standard form for the argument. Bush is like Reagan. Oh, Q1. Bush is like Reagan in that they are both staunch Christian conservatives. That's the known similarity between the two analogs. Oh, and we want to capitalize Reagan. P2, Reagan got involved in a foreign policy debacle. Bush will get involved in a foreign policy debacle. Okay, so now we need to evaluate the argument, and the thing to do here is to remember which critical questions are important for evaluating arguments, by analogy, that is. In general, we ask, do the premises support the conclusion? Are the premises true? And is there missing information? But when we go to arguments by analogy, there's a different set of questions. Let's just look those up so that we can remember them. These are the questions for arguments by analogy. How many reference analogs? How diverse are they? How many known similarities are they? How relevant are they? And is there any important missing information? So the first four correspond to ways for understanding whether the premises support the conclusion or would support the conclusion if they're true. And the fifth is asking about missing information. We don't have a specific question here about whether the premises are true or at least likely, but in fact, they are true, or at least likely. So that's fine. So we can just go back to our test and say, oops, there's one reference analog. Let's number these. There's one reference analog. So that's not many. That's kind of weak. Two, diverse. Because there's one reference analog, this question doesn't apply. You could just write not applicable here, but I'm spelling it all out to make it clear for you guys. Three, there's basically one similarity. One known similarity being a staunch conservative Christian. Now, is it relevant? I would actually say that the more relevant feature, and now, honestly, we're just talking about my view of history, so you can say whatever you want here. I would say that being a cold warrior, a hardened cold warrior, is more relevant. So I'm agreeing with the conclusion. I mean, Bush the Elder did get involved in a foreign policy debacle, the first Gulf War. That's also just my opinion, but I'll say it. So in a sense, the conclusion is true, but I think that the argument is not a good analogy because it's identifying the wrong part of their character. Yeah, that's just my opinion. Is relevant information missing? Well, yeah, actually, Cold War, but this isn't a relevant difference. So actually, we're going to say no relevant differences. I think Bush the Elder was, again, my opinion, just a less charismatic version of Ronald Reagan. Bush the Elder was not very good at pretending like he was a cowboy, which is what Reagan and Bush the Younger were both excellent at. But that's not a substantial issue. That's just an image issue. And again, you don't have to agree with me. Okay. 7. What is the best definition of ad hominem quoque? To move this along, I'm not going to find this slide, but this is going to be in your class 10 PowerPoint. So ad hominem is an attack on a person when it's not relevant, right? And so we can see that the second item here is the general definition of an ad hominem. We know it's not that. This is a specific kind of ad hominem. And you can see actually that this is a different specific kind of ad hominem. That's the ad hominem abusive. This one is the ad hominem circumstantial. This is the one we want. This one isn't even an ad hominem. All right. The next question, set of 3 questions, asks you to look at a dialogue. And essentially what I'm looking for here is understanding whether a person is making a legitimate critique of an argument from authority or an illegitimate ad hominem attack. So this is back when marijuana legalization was on the ballot for issue, and it was labeled issue 3. It's on the ballot again this November as issue 2. Um, so, issue 3, advocate. Legalizing and taxing marijuana raised huge amounts of money for Colorado and hasn't created any serious problems for the state. We should try the same thing in Ohio by voting for issue 3. Issue 3 opponent, you're just saying that because you work for the companies that will be granted a legal monopoly over growing marijuana by issue 3. That was a provision in the original version of the bill that isn't in the new one. But what you can see here is that the advocate is making a perfectly reasonable argument by analogy between the situations in Ohio and Colorado, and the issue 3 opponent is responding with a personal attack. This is going to look like an ad hominem, specifically an ad hominem circumstantial. We can fill out the remaining questions accordingly. So the issue 3 advocate, their conclusion is that you should vote for issue 3, obviously. The reasoning given by the issue 3 opponent is an ad hominem circumstantial. Well, I should role model reading all of the possibilities here. So it's not an ad hominem tu quoque. That would be something that ad hominem tu quoque is where you accuse the other person of having the same flaws that they're criticizing. So the classic ad hominem these tu quoque these days is, I'm not racist, you're racist. The other options are all about saying that the attack is legitimate, either saying it's the truth of the premises, the strength of the reasoning, or the third one, the validity of the premises. And this is the most wrong answer of the bunch. You would lose 10 points for this one because premises are not valid. Inferences are valid or strong. Premises are true or false. All right. Suppose he had said, actually, marijuana has caused a lot of problems for Colorado. What would he be doing? He would be challenging the truth of one of the premises. Important premise for the speaker is that that it's essentially the inferred similarity about Colorado. Ohio and Colorado are similar. Marijuana legalization worked in Colorado, therefore it will work in Ohio. And he's saying, no, it didn't work in Colorado. So that is, again, challenging the truth of the premises. And again here, if you say the validity of the premises, you're way off, and that is the least correct answer. Okay. Sample of convenience. A sample of convenience is a sample where members of the population choose to. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not. It's a sample of individuals that happen to be accessible to the researcher. So when college professors of psychology conduct experiments, survey-based experiments on people in their freshman psych course, that's a sample of convenience. All right. Last question, IS, IG, and analyze. So you need to know whether you need to be able to identify an argument as an instantiation syllogism or an inductive generalization, and then write it in standard form and evaluate it. Now, the thing to remember here is that something is an inductive generalization if the big categorical quantified statement, the big generalization is in the conclusion, and if it's instantiation syllogism, if the big generalization is in the premises. A field biologist assesses the damage from an illegal dumping ground for toxic waste. I was able to gather 48 frogs from a 5-mile radius of the dumping ground in the swamp, and 10 of them had serious mutations with extra eyes or limbs. We can expect that about 10,000 frogs live in an area of that size. My guess is about a fifth of them have serious mutations. This is the conclusion, right? And so the speaker is moving from a small sample of 49 to a large population of 10,000. So that's inductive generalization. P1 in a sample of 49 frogs gathered from near the dumping site had mutations. Therefore, in the whole population of 10,000, 1/5 will have serious mutations. The critical questions here are, is the sample large and is the sample representative? And if you go back to the PowerPoint slide, actually you can see there's a rule of thumb slide that basically lets you know that this sample is not large enough. For 10,000 individuals, you're going to need close to, well, let's just look at that. So for a population of 10,000, to get the desired plus or minus 3% margin of error, you need about 1,000 individuals, which that's no good, right? 50 is way off the mark. Is the sample size large enough? No. And I'm just going to spell out a bit of detail here and say 10,000 is a big population, so you need a larger sample. Is the sample representative? No. And the clue you can see here is that the biologist was just gathering frogs from near the dumping site. The frogs are from near the dumping site, right? So they're more likely to have mutations. They aren't it isn't random. Also, the frogs were just the ones the biologist could catch, and maybe mutant frogs are easier to catch. Okay, so that is the practice test. And as before, you have an opportunity at the very bottom to answer questions that to give explanations for any of the multiple choice, but you don't have to use that. I like that because it helps. Sometimes people, when they explain their answer, make me realize that the question was worded vaguely. And it helps you because sometimes once I realize what you're thinking, I realize you deserve at least partial credit, maybe even full credit. Okay, so that's the practice test. Good luck on the real test.